There we go. Cool. Alright, so yeah, pardon me guys while I'm getting this set up. I'm using a new video streaming source, my camera phone, which is much better than my laptop webcam. So, cool, I think I've got it up and running. Can't tell though. I think the audio is probably good, at least with the microphone check. It seemed to be okay. So I'm going to proceed as if everything is okay for now. Anyway, welcome to Tea Time, my friends, a place where I muse about my gender transition experience and in the process aim to comfort and inspire others to a greater level of self-awareness. This is my, admittedly, only second live stream ever. So, again, still getting the technological kinks worked out, but hopefully now we should be good to go. And this live stream, a couple of goals that I have for it. First of which is to address some comments that I received on one of my videos. Somebody had asked me to cover some topics that I think are really, really important. So I'm going to read out the comment that this individual had made, and then I'm going to go through and address the comments per their request. So, and then I have some announcements, so actually I'll probably go ahead and start with those first, because this individual had said that they wished they could participate in the live stream if at all possible, so I will give them some more time, since they're on the other side of the globe, to be able to get in and join. So, anyway, as far as the announcements go, there is a couple of new projects that I've been working on. If you've been following the channel, the newest project that just kind of was a spur of the moment that I've been coining Defense Against the Dark Narcs, a little bit of comedy interjected into what's really kind of a pretty serious topic. But I found that in addressing some of the comments that I get on my videos, of course, when you put yourself out there in public, you're going to get the full range of responses from people that agree with you to people that are out to troll you or, are vehemently in opposition to your position and definitely want you to know about that. And a lot of those more negative comments, I realized, could be very useful in helping to bring to light some of the toxic response styles that people have that really get in the way of making progress with, social progress, I guess you could say, with civil discourse, which is something that I aim on my channel to do, is to have, mature civil discourse and help each other learn and grow. So I thought it would be a pretty good idea to break down some of those comments that get in the way of making that happen to like a real-time example of the negative behaviors that we see out there that some people will just think are normal and might not really fully understand what's going on with those communication styles, which again are prohibitive in my mind to actually having productive conversation. So that's what the series Defense Against the Dark Narcs is aimed at doing. It's aimed to, oh, there you are, Sonia. Yes, awesome. Very happy to see you. I'm glad everything is at least seemingly enough okay for you to jump on the live stream. So I'm going to just respond to you real quick here. All right. So anyway, that's the series of Defense Against the Dark Narcs that I'll be doing periodically interspersed throughout my normal videos that I will be releasing on topics which I've, seemingly have an endless supply of those that have scripts that just need finished and videos that just need produced. So, one step at a time. I tend to spread myself thin with projects because I get ideas for so many things, and it's difficult sometimes for me to put everything out cohesively all together, so I trickle things out a little bit at a time. That being said, the last live stream that I did, I had another series that I started and will continue to work on it throughout, which is the video series about wokeism and how that relates to the LGBT sector, news, headlines, and topics that relate specifically to this new political ideology that is being called wokeism, and again, how that affects the the permutations of that within the LGBT sector. So that's a project that I still have running. You might see in my list of my playlists mini-series that I have ongoing. So add Defense Against the Dark Narcs to that. So those two projects then I've got ongoing, and a third one that I'm going to be starting very soon is a public engagement project. So some of you might know of the channel Louder with Crowder, where perhaps before he started doing this regular series that he has, he started the Change My Mind public engagement project. And the idea that I have is to kind of spin off of that idea. And instead of coming at the public with more of an adversarial, antagonistic feel, which Crowder does by starting conversations with, change my mind. It's a challenge, basically. And that's kind of his bag. He comes very well armed for the arguments that he makes, and then wants for somebody to hit back, essentially, and try to change his mind. Again, it's very combative and competitive, and if that works for him, great. I'm sure it makes for very interesting, entertaining television. That's not quite the goal that I have for my channel and for my endeavors in general. So I'm changing that idea up just a little bit to be more friendly and engaging for the public, since right now I think it's very, very important, given the current political attention given to the LGBT community and the radical activism that's happening within that the more moderate people within the LGBT community, I think, would do very well to stand up and state their differences from the radical activism that we are seeing. Because if we don't, we risk being lumped in with those radical activists and being seen just the same, and I don't think that's very good PR for the group in general. So this new public engagement project that I have set up is aiming to be more conversational with people and give them a chance to air their concerns and grievances with somebody who is associated with the LGBT community without that very antagonistic and tyrannical behavior that we're seeing with those radical activists. So I'm going to be setting up a tent in a public area with a banner that says, "I am transgender, let's chat." And my aim is just to let people come to me with whatever it is that they want to say and allow them to say that without trying to change their mind. And the goal is, again, to let them air their thoughts out with somebody in a very mature and safe space. I know that those two words have been used horribly right now, but essentially that's what I'm doing, is I'm creating a space that's helping them to feel more comfortable and less adversarial. So we're going to see how that goes. I have some of that set up to first be filmed here at the end of this month in some of my local areas, and just see what happens. So anyway, I'm very, very excited about that. And that being said, we're going to go ahead now and dive into, since the commenter who initiated essentially the idea for this live stream is now present in the chat, so that's awesome. We're going to go ahead and address what this person had to say and asking my opinion on the topics. So the comment was, "I would like to know how you envision a world in which the LGBT community would be able to rid itself of the narcissism, childish attempts to control other people's language, thoughts, and deeds, refusal to discuss certain topics in order to achieve some sort of balance, etc. The ideal and the realistic picture of it, and whether you think the community will ever be able to leave this toxicity behind. The second topic is not related directly to LGBT issues, but to personal responsibility. I wonder, do you sometimes struggle with the project of personal responsibility as something that's similar to a father shaking his finger at his child, or have you reached a point in which you view it and feel it solely as a path to self-liberation without the specter of punishment lurking? So again, I thought that was a fantastically worded question and a topic that absolutely needs discussed right now, because I think this is where we are, this situation where the radical activists are, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, they're the loudest right now, and they are in some ways being allowed to be the voice for this group in general. And we definitely, as a community at the very least, need to, those of us that don't agree with the radical activists need to start speaking up and differentiating ourselves from that, or else we risk being lumped in with all of them. So again, there's a lot going on here with this topic, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time if this seems like a very convoluted and long-winded response, because there is so much supporting material that I have to give in order to answer this question, at least from my perspective, that it might take a minute for me to get through all of it, but here we go in the best way that I can. So I don't feel like it's just the LGBT community that is experiencing this takeover or public relations representation by a tyrannical group of activists. So this seems to happen really with any group anywhere. You'll see it in government overreach with excessive lawmaking. You'll see it in religious institutions attempting to eliminate people or others who disagree with their beliefs. I mean, you'll even see it in dysfunctional family units. So this kind of tyrannical, narcissistic behavior, I control you in order to self-regulate myself or make myself feel better. I mean, this is a concept it's everywhere. It's through every aspect of life. It's the radical end of activism, the radical end of human behavior, I suppose. So, given the universal presence of this problem, I think the root of the condition strongly lies in human behavioral biology. So it's very, very deeply rooted. And I'll get into that here in a minute. We also need to define kind of narcissism a little bit for this discussion. It's a term that gets thrown out a lot. So for the purposes of this chat, we'll lay out a couple important points about it. Narcissism is the thoughts and behaviors that reflect a focus on the interest of oneself. It's technically being selfish, you could say. It's not always a bad thing to be selfish, because everyone must have a degree of self-interest, or else they're likely to become victims at the hands of others. Knowing then that we all have this seed of narcissism within us, then we have to know that some people are more prone to narcissism becoming a toxic imbalance, or it could just be that they're outright fixed facets of their character that can't be changed. So I believe that within all groups of people, there will always be this very loud, very self-absorbed portion of said group that make for a bad representation for the rest of the group. So you think about radical Christians or Muslims, radical feminists, it's everywhere, in every group. So on that note of ridding the group of narcissism, or ridding narcissism in general, I don't believe that would ever be thoroughly possible, but we can mitigate that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit here. But to see where we are with narcissism even further, we kind of have to put it into context of where we have come from. And this is where we're going to talk a little bit about human behavioral biology, evolutionary biology. So, evolutionary biology is concerned with selfish survival, because there was always going to be a brute out there trying to kill you or take advantage of you. That's just kind of the nature of existence here. We look at the animal kingdom, it translates directly to us. Even though we'd like to think we're more evolved as human beings, there's still this underlying, animal behavior 101 kind of thing, which is just selfish survival. The very fact that, brutish people out there exist is enough to motivate people with fear. So that's how governments can manipulate people into more and more control. And the people who are in control are there because they're interested in power, not empathy. Because an empathetic person would not take a position where they realize the decisions that they're making are going to disadvantage a large group of people. Because that's just, anytime you have a large group of people, you have a lot of diversity within that, and you would understand that the decisions that you make is going to disadvantage somebody. And someone who's a very empathetic individual is not at all interested in that kind of power or control. So we kind of have to realize that those people that are in power and not positions of leadership, that's different. People who are in power, like our government, they are there because they are keenly interested in power, not people. And that's very difficult for a lot of people to kind of come to terms with, because also buried within human behavioral biology is that, from the very start, we come programmed to look up to figures of authority. And when we're little, that's our parents. We place a lot of power and authority in those adults that are in our lives. And we tend to do the same thing when we're adults. We just translate those authority figures to doctors, lawyers, politicians, God, even if you want, but it's all the same concept. We give reverence and authority, we outsource that to other people as adults without thinking about it. And even if we do think about it, we do it because we complicate our lives with so many things that we outsource that power to other people and then don't give it a second thought. We don't bother to go back and reevaluate that position for each individual person that we give that kind of power and authority to. So it's kind of a dangerous situation. And we've done this throughout history repeatedly. I was watching a documentary recently from Professor Mary Beard on the BBC on the history of Rome. And in there, she even talks about how there was one of the first Roman rulers who became a dictator, essentially a Roman emperor named Pompey. At the point where the people were looking for a way to rid their sphere of influence of something that they feared, which at the time were pirates that were running ships on the Mediterranean, causing a lot of problems for the people there. These people basically elected and gave all of their power and authority to one individual, whose name was Pompey, to rid the Mediterranean of the pirates, which he did in 3 months. But then after that, he turned all of his firepower and attention to other nations around the area and just started wiping out and massively conquering, everything around him. But that was the turning point where people gave all of their power away to one individual person. At least as far as Mary Beard says, the Roman Empire began and how one person rule happened. So again, I'm giving you an example of how fear of something galvanized individuals to give away some of their freedoms and put all of their trust and powers of authority into one individual person. So this is not, a new or novel thing. We've been doing this for a very, very long time. But then these people, again, that are in power, they're in power because that's exclusively what they're interested in, is power. They are narcissistic individuals, and they know to divide and conquer, to keep people from finding common ground. They keep creating this division so that people will continuously give their support to somebody who will fix the problem. So I know that was kind of a big old tangent there that I just took, but it's all wrapped up in that concept of narcissism is something that can be a fixed trait within somebody who is exclusively self-interested and interested in power, and that person is always going to want to create fear and division amongst people so that they constantly think that somebody is out there out to get them, and will prevent people from seeing others as we can work together and finding more unity and peace in that way. So I'm going to go back here and look at my notes because I know I run off on a tangent. Make sure that I'm eventually coming around to the point for you. So, okay. So we have everyone capable of varying degrees of narcissism depending on their innate character traits, which we can't do much about that. But we have narcissism that is influenced by experience. So we do have control over that. So if everybody's got a grain of narcissism within them, and let's just say you grew up in a emotionally abusive environment, narcissism to some degree can also be a self-defense mechanism. You develop a degree of narcissism, okay, I'm going to get you first before you get me kind of thing, because that's what you've been taught. It doesn't have to be that way, though. We can definitely mitigate the effects of narcissism by starting from a very young age, teaching kids cooperation and personal responsibility and a lot of these empathy is another big one, and ways that they can protect themselves from those individuals out there that would wish to harm them or have fixed character traits of narcissism, that they're just always going to be interested in control and controlling other people, but to differentiate between when they can use their skills to protect themselves and when they can feel safe to be empathetic and cooperative with other people. So, but again, we're always going to have individuals that are interested in control and power because that's just a human behavioral biology trait. It's a selfish trait that's just there from deeply buried genetics, essentially. So, like I said, we're never going to be fully able to get rid of it, but we can mitigate it with teaching kids some of these skills and starting from the very bottom, and then again also recognizing that these systems of governance and power that we have are not interested in that. So we're constantly fighting the fear propaganda that's being put out there by these systems of governance. So I feel a little bit like Aristotle here. Here's a half-assed answer for how to fix this because everything sucks and this is the best we have, but we're always trying to find, again, I feel, the best balance between a lot of different factors for what we have at the time, because there's some things that you just can't change, can't fix. Okay, I'm going to check my chat here for a second and see if there's anything that's popped up. Okay, all right, so. All right. So yeah, as far as whether or not I think the community will ever be able to leave the toxicity of narcissism and that childish behavior behind, only when people within the group who do not support that speak up more and more loudly than the radical activists do. And I'm not saying that we need to go come to blows or be physically harmful or anything like that with the individuals who, the radical activists who are pushing a lot of this really toxic messaging. Simply speaking louder and having empathy for all of the people that are being affected in the periphery by those radical activists, to just make that distinction. Because you can't fight fire with fire. Recently I saw a video that popped up. I don't even know what university it was, but it was some university professor who basically was just antagonizing the audience of some, gathering, some speech that was happening, where the audience was pretty much all the, trans radical activists, and the professor was shouting over them, shouting at them, antagonizing them with, language that wasn't at all helpful. And of course, the audience was just getting more and more amped up and enraged and essentially borderline riot-inducing behavior. And I don't know why that professor thought that that was reasonable to handle things that way, because expect fully that if you engage in that way, that with that group of people you're going to get that right back. So, and honestly, I don't know that there really is a way to deal with a group of people that are behaving in such a fashion where they're, shouting, screaming, spitting, essentially they are fully activated in the primitive parts of their brain, which is fight, flight. At that point, there's a lot of research out there that shows that there's nothing to be done with somebody who's in that state of mind because they are not in a reasonable state of mind at all. It's essentially animal behavior at that point, so there is no reasoning with it. So I don't know, when you've reached that point, there isn't much to do besides let the conversation cool off and not continue to engage in that way. So really the only thing to do instead of engaging with those people directly is to talk to the people in the periphery that are affected by those individuals that might be on the fence, that are seeing this and going, I don't really like what's going on with this group as far as I can see. And like what I'm attempting to do with my public engagement is to talk to people who are seeing this really alarming message and then associate a calmer, more mature face with that discussion than what social media perhaps is putting out there for them to see. So, notes here that I have about what's going on with those individuals who are the radical activists who are pushing this kind of rhetoric. There are two types of control that we as individuals can have. And there's an internal and an external locus of control. So anytime there is a problem or a conflict, you have a choice. You can choose that path of personal responsibility and behave in a way that takes control of your own actions and your actions only, or that would be an internal locus of control, or you can enact an external locus of control, which is what the radical activists are attempting to do. They are saying, I feel this way, therefore it is your job to make me feel better, however that looks. That is, let me use whatever restroom I feel I want, and, you be damned, I don't care what your feelings are, this is my right, my privilege, my, whatever, so I'm going to enact this external locus of control and change something for you in order for me to feel better. And that is, as my commenter had said, it's a very childish attempt to control people, all the way down to their thoughts too. Like pronouns. You are not allowed to think of me as whatever pronoun you see. It needs to be at the level of I'm controlling your thoughts in order to reflect back to me what I want to see about myself. So I did a video about that, the to she or not to she, the pronoun video that talks about that narcissistic external locus of control specifically, if you want more on that. So it's very natural for, I think, for human behavior in general to enact that external locus of control. I think it takes a much higher-minded individual to take responsibility for their feelings, their emotions, their role in any situation, and to change that where it only affects themselves and leaves other people largely intact. And that's a very empathetic thing to do as well, which again, these radical activists are not at all considering. It's much easier to just try to externally control everything else around you than it is to take the personal responsibility. And so I think that's the point that my commenter was getting at a little bit here in the last part of the comment, which was, I wonder, do you sometimes struggle with the project of personal responsibility as something that's similar to a father shaking his finger at his child, or have you reached a point in which you view it and feel it solely as a path to self-liberation without the specter of punishment lurking? So, to talk more about that specifically, Also, going back to human behavior 101, unless there is, as this person says, a specter of punishment, unless there is a potential consequence that they deem bad enough, humans in general will not make a change unless there is a consequence for their behavior. And there's always a consequence, whether or not you see it as a consequence. And for myself, I see things on two levels. So there's the primitive part of the human psyche, or the human brain, you could say, that is very monkey mind, essentially. It's a very knee-jerk response, input output, nothing more. It's a program, essentially, for survival. And then there's the higher mind, the one that is in charge of the social interactions that we have on a level that is perhaps more empathetic. There is evidence for altruism in animal behavior as actually being a program, but again, it's still based on consequence. How much negative consequence am I going to experience, and is altruism going to actually get me a better outcome? So some of that is still a program, but I guess it's kind of hard to define exactly what that higher mind is. But in any case, there's two levels. Clearly, there's the animal input-output, programming, knee-jerk, and then there's a higher consciousness that's going on here. So I know, at least for myself, from my own personal experience, that it's possible to take somebody who perhaps has more of the narcissistic characteristics that are, self-interested, and to teach that person that there are healthier and more advantageous ways of going about life, and not just because you fear, heaven or hell or, God or anything like that. Just that it makes for more peaceful living, as the commenter here was saying, a path to self-liberation, essentially. And I know, again, for me, that it's possible to take somebody who has more of that animal brain and to teach them more higher levels of consciousness, empathy, because myself, that was my own personal, has been my own personal path so far. As a much younger individual, I was definitely more self-interested, less concerned with anybody else's comfort, I'm sorry to say. And it was definitely more of that animal behavior 101, what's in it for me kind of thing. I'm going to do this because either there's a potential punishment that I don't want to incur, or there's some benefit for me. And I will say that really the only thing that changed me was that I met somebody that I really on a deeper level respected and wanted to have a relationship with said individual. And at one point, we got married, and it nearly cost me the marriage in not becoming that higher-minded individual. So, like I said, I'm sorry to say, it did take the threat of consequence in that way to change my mind, and I feel like a lot of human behavior is that way, unfortunately. It's not just, I'm going to be good for the sake of being good. It's just something that's buried within human behavioral biology. If there's no consequence, then I have no need to exert any kind of energetic cost in trying to follow that pursuit. And that's, again, it's very survival-based, which is entirely what this planet is about, as far as I can tell, in animal behavior. So, that being said, I know that we can teach people who might have more narcissistic bend people that have more of a narcissistic bend, we can teach them to be more empathetic and to have that personal responsibility, and not just for the threat of consequence, but just for a more peaceful existence. Because there is liberation in taking personal responsibility, because instead of making that locus of control external, therefore that you're always trying to control other people and other circumstances, which is actually really exhausting, constantly being on guard for that, you turn that focus then into yourself, and you are only ever responsible for you. That's actually a huge burden lifted from your consciousness to know that it's just you. Some people at first may find that actually to be really alarming, and perhaps not at all any easier, because then that means that the problem is with them, and that's kind of a blow to the ego, that you are responsible for you, and no matter what, you have a choice in everything that you do, and that could be pretty scary for a lot of people, and maybe they don't want to face that. They would rather try to control other people. For myself, though, when I realized just how much freedom there was in accepting that personal responsibility, it lifted a huge burden for me. Not to have to, be trying to control other people, which, by the way, trying to control other people, if you've ever tried it, is like herding cats. It's not easy by any means. It is very exhausting consistently. So, I think how we can fix some of this to some degree, mitigate this narcissism and the external locus of control that these people are enacting, is from an early age teaching this personal responsibility and empathy, and also teaching children that that not everybody is like that or can be like that, and teaching them how to protect themselves. It's one thing to say kumbaya and everybody can love everybody and everything's going to be just fine, and then another to completely ignore that that's just never going to be objective reality, that there's always going to be danger lurking. Again, because of human behavioral biology, we can't just eliminate the psychopaths, the criminally insane, the people that create chaos, or even the people that, even if they're not on that level, are still, like I said, politicians and government officials who are just interested in power. That's not something that I think is ever going to go away unless the human genome changes completely, that we're not focused on survival at a deep genetic level. So teaching kids the nuance there, that how to protect themselves, but also when and where to employ that empathy and the discernment in employing the empathy and the cooperation, and critical thinking is another big one that we don't teach, and I think there's a reason that public schools and places like that don't teach that sort of thing, but that's a whole other topic. It really boils down to just parents taking that responsibility to teach their children these things, not relying on a public school system to do so. And again, that's a whole other bigger picture, the number of people having children that are not doing that for one reason or another, and you begin to see just how difficult implementing this kind of cultural shift really would be, because if people really started to analyze the choices that they make on a very deeply empathetic level, not just for themselves, but for potentially the child that they're going to have, and every person whose life they're going to touch, themselves and the child is going to touch out there. The complexity there is pretty mind-boggling, and a lot of people just prefer not to have to think about it again. So we have that problem in general, that there's just not enough self-reflection going on top of so many other things. Like generational trauma. Before you can even begin to help somebody else, you have to help yourself first. And we have this concept that is out there now of generational trauma. Different dysfunctional families, baggage, leaking down generation after generation that just hasn't been dealt with in any kind of therapeutic sense. And until we can handle that for each of ourselves, we really can't begin to help anybody else around us. So, it again starts at that level of personal responsibility. You taking care of yourself before you can even begin to take care of anything outside of yourself or be a positive influence in that way. So for me, at this point, the project of personal responsibility, I don't keep it up for, threat of any kind of punishment. I keep it up because for me it truly does bring an inner sense of peace. Knowing that I am in control of myself and I alone, and even if that means mostly withdrawing from just about everything in order to make sure that the environment that I'm in is as healthy as possible. A lot of people are afraid to do that. We're social creatures. We don't want to lose those sorts of things. I feel like for myself I've been through a very, very radical change in which, shortly before I started my transition, I withdrew from just about everything. Family, friends, moved 1,000 miles away from where I was, and really took some time to completely gut all of the garbage that I had been carrying with me up till this point in my life and reorient things. And I lost just about all the friends that I had made, and as far as family goes, I keep that at a pretty decent distance. There are things that need to be worked out there. And at first it was extremely difficult. I wondered if I had done the right thing. And I know that that would be challenging for a lot of people to do, and most people perhaps would not want to do that. And maybe you don't have to go about it as 180 degree, full stop like I did and go the other direction. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. But considering that a lot of people make choices to stay comfortable in what they know, the familiarity of what you know is better, or rather there's some kind of a saying out there that the discomfort that you know is better than the discomfort that you don't. And I think a lot of people will stay comfortable in their discomfort and not, venture out into the unknown, especially if that means potentially losing family or friends over that kind of personal change. So for me, at this point, though, after having gone through all of that and experiencing just how much less garbage in my life that I deal with, having withdrawn from all of that and reorienting my focus on just, the amount of control that I have over myself is priceless. I continue to live that way because I really experience benefit from it personally. And I don't know that everybody would. That's for each individual person to decide, pros and cons to each. But there is indeed, for me, a punishment and a consequence if I don't remain personally responsible, and I know that consequence is to go back to the way things work, which is just roller coaster of emotions, very exhausting, and I wouldn't go back to that ever. So for me, I guess you could say I'm behaving this way because the consequence is if I don't, I go back to being a way that I just can't. I can't unsee what I've seen now. And there is some drawback to that, that when you get to that sort of level of operation, it can be kind of isolating if you, I suppose if you feel that way, if you miss just the familiarity of some of the things that you used to have. And it does become, I think, a little bit trickier finding people who are thinking on that same level, because I do believe that being on this level of personal responsibility and thinking and seeing things this way is not as common of a route to go. I know Jordan Peterson has talked about it, that it's you can, you have two choices, that either everything you do means nothing and you can do whatever you want to do, or everything you do means something. And for people to choose that option, that everything you do means something, it's a pretty big load of responsibility. And again, I don't see everybody taking that on, because it's easier in a lot of ways to just not care. So I hope I answered that question well enough. That was hugely rambling, and I'm still recovering from a stomach illness that I had a few weeks ago that's just absolutely scrambled my brain, so I'm not as cohesive as I normally am. But like I said, I do hope that was helpful in some way. Oh, geez. So, chat, since I've not been paying attention to it. Desert grape. This is an interesting topic. Thanks for talking about it. Thank you very much for being here and listening to what I've had to say. I welcome anything that you guys would like to bring to the chat. And now that I think I finished rambling for the time being, I'm going to go into and address the things that you guys have been bringing up here in the chat. Oh, yes, okay. So Sonia says, I don't want to interrupt your thoughts and listening carefully and intend to write a comment below. Perfect, thank you. But if you happen to glance at the chat box, it would be great if you could address the social contagion aspect of this whole story you're talking about. Okay, so the social contagion aspect. So when the first thing that I think of with the social contagion aspect is for where I first heard it, which was the talk between Abigail Schreier and Jordan Peterson, talking about the social contagion of transgenderism and how it seems as though we're seeing a huge spike in people identifying as transgender when they are not actually transgender. They're using it as a convenient vehicle to try to fix something that is broken within themselves. So you're welcome to correct me in the chat at some point if that's not quite what you were talking about, but I'll talk about that briefly for a few minutes here to address it. As far as I can tell, there are social contagions, and there have been, throughout history. That's a feature, strangely, of human behavioral biology. I'm not exactly sure the mechanism of why something like that occurs. It's a lot like the mass formation psychosis. It seems like it has something to do with triggering the fear within a social animal, the hive-based mind, where everybody or a lot of people will react a certain way based on a fear impetus, or a fear catalyst. So one of the first things that I think of is the Salem witch trials. So we had this kind of mass formation psychosis that happened at that point. It was a perfect storm where a group of young girls were all faking I guess a demonic possession or a possession of sorts, and that led to the adults within the community then attempting to find the source of this and then punishing that source in order to purge the community of the problems. Now, I'm sure that there were a lot of politically complicated factors going on at the time, none of which I know exactly, so I'm not going to say too much more beyond what I've said about that era in history. But this is, like I said, I think the social contagion concept is something that we see all the time, and it's hive mind mentality reacting to some kind of fear thing. We're getting real complex with our words here. So, as far as it relates to transgenderism, there seems to be, so again, this is also something to note, that it often happens with young girls. The Salem witch trials, transgenderism, it's happening a lot amongst teenage girls. And personally, this is just a personal theory, I don't have any papers to back it up, so take that as you will. I think that young females and females in general, their domain of strength tends to be in the emotional concepts. So they tend to be more emotionally empathetic, emotionally introspective. Their world is a little bit more complex and richer in that way than males, typically speaking. Not always true, but it's a general trend. And so you will often see social contagion start within young females, and we know that our brains are not developed until at least the age of 25. So in young girls who don't quite have a good grasp on their emotional world, they are attempting to find answers. And I think we see this huge spike in transgenderism, claimed transgenderism amongst teenage girls because they are trying to figure out a solution to all the very complicated emotional feelings that they have. Like I said, their world is usually much richer than a masculine person or a male. And I say this just from my own personal experience because, for crying out loud, I lived not even out of the closet. I was a closeted lesbian, unaware of my own sexuality until I was like 27 years old. So as a masculine brain person, that's just not a strong suit that I had. I didn't even have enough grip on myself. But I do feel like females or feminine people do. That's their strong suit. So again, we see the social contagion because the young girls are grasping for answers. And in the concept of transgenderism, it's sort of being billed that, the answer to your problems is just that you are in the wrong body, or you can make some kind of external change that it has to do with something that's pretty simple, like male-female based. And if you do this, then you can leave behind all of the complicated emotional problems that you have. That's the solution. That's the belief that is sort of being trotted out there in, I don't know if this is in any kind of professional medical community whatsoever, but this is just what's being said. So, make sure I'm answering this question well enough. Yeah. So, and right now, as far as I'm concerned, the medical community is not doing their do no harm oath by questioning these young girls, young people in general, to really come up with the source of why they think that they are transgender and why that they think that that's going to fix their problems. And I feel like oftentimes it's just that they are experiencing issues with, like, for example, one commenter on my channel is a 14-year-old girl, and she has been struggling with being morbidly obese, and the family, the dynamic between the mother and father has been broken for some time by admission of the commenter on the channel, on the video. And I think because transgender is now out there and these girls are aware of it, they think, oh, that must be the solution. They're grasping at something that's relatively tangible as far as concepts go. Again, it's not some convoluted, you have, I don't know, a constellation of mental health issues. It's, oh, you're supposed to be a boy, And so the medical community is not doing any favors by this whole affirmation, this culture of affirmation where it's just, okay, yep, you say that you are, so you are, and let's just push you on through. And this goes back to the concept of us putting a lot of trust in authority figures, doctors, medical professionals, in that they really do have our best interest at heart without questioning that or without knowing any better to question that. And it's kind of a complicated topic, so I can see why most people would rather just outsource that trust into somebody that they think knows any better. But much like Big Pharma and a good chunk of the medical community, I would say, is that they're interested in business profit. I'm sure there are doctors out there that are caring and concerned. I do believe that. I also think that there's a lot of them that are just concerned with the profit. And they really don't care to ask those questions beforehand, or they're afraid to. That's another thing to get into the weeds about, which is that, we have this the extremely narcissistic push by the radical activists, which is, if you don't give me what I feel I want, or I feel I need, I think I need, then I will dox you, I will destroy you, I will punish you severely. And so you will have medical professionals that just say, okay, you sign this contract that says I'm not liable for anything, or, you can sue for medical malpractice, and doctors have to carry very hefty medical malpractice insurance for reasons just like this, that you can sue that entity and that I won't be responsible, and it's a lot less messy in that way, which, you can't really blame the doctors in that way, that they're concerned that their livelihood would be ruined because of somebody like this. So it's kind of a mess in general all around. We're dealing with both the narcissistic tyranny of transgender activists and people that claim that they're transgender, or they have other mental health concerns, thinking that transgender is going to fix that, and they will push for by any means necessary to get that, to get what they want. So, my wife is behind the scenes here, sending me notes to make sure that I'm covering things as well as possible. Okay, so Olivia, and by the way, I hope I addressed the social contagion well enough. If I didn't, please feel free to let me know if there's something more. Yeah, Salem witch trials. Yep, absolutely. So this is and again, the fact that we've seen this throughout history, as far as the social contagion goes, like I said, it's a facet of human behavioral biology, as far as I can tell, and it rears its ugly head periodically for any number of reasons when the cultural conditions are appropriate. So Olivia Maynard says woke and anti-woke seem toxic as concepts. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say personally that woke is what happens when the left side of politics become radicalized. So for me, left and right political ideologies represent major character facets that people can have. So you have, the big 5 character traits. And you'll see that in general, people that fall on the left side of politics tend to be high in openness, and they're usually more creative individuals as far as artistically creative goes. And then people on the right will be more concerned with security, stability. They are not very high in openness. And I believe that you need left and right, just like left and right hemisphere of your brain. You need both to have the best operating capability as you can as an individual. So I believe that relating that to political ideologies, woke would be left, radical left, and anti-woke, or you could say like anti-woke, you can just say anti-woke, would be the radical right. And radical anything is off the deep end and not productive for society, as far as I can tell. It's just the toxic ends of the spectrum. You always want somewhere closer to the center. In any given scenario, one might be slightly better than the other given the details of the scenario, but in general, you want more middle of the road. So Olivia says, can't some things mean something and some things mean nothing? Black and white thinking usually isn't correct. Yeah, black and white thinking generally, I would say, is pretty limiting. It does have its uses. But yeah, nuanced thinking is, in general, I think, a far better approach. Critical thinking, essentially, never to say that something is always right or something is always wrong. Most of the time, again, nuance is kind of key there. I think it takes a lot of mental processing power, though, to consider the nuance of things, and that's why a lot of people will default to black and white thinking, because it's an autopilot setting that's just easier to navigate day to day. And I don't blame people, when you have to make snap decisions and you have a lot going on, to sit there and ponder the nuance of things. I mean, for crying out loud, just trying to buy a microphone for this endeavor that I have here, trying to research the specs on all of them, and okay, well, in this scenario it'd be better, in this scenario it'd be better. I mean, 3 days going by and you're in analysis paralysis and you just want to give up and say, all right, Amazon, just recommend something for me because this is exhausting. I get it. But anyway, all of that to say that nuance is tough, but I think that's where you're going to find the optimal answers. And do I think that the vast majority of people, or a good chunk of people that are in charge of making decisions, are doing that? No. And that's where we get a lot of our problems from. Okay, so I think we are caught up on the chat for now, which is awesome. So, that being said, pretty sure that covers everything that I wanted to cover in this live stream. As far as that comment goes, and I'm going to wait just a minute here or two to see if there's anything else that pops up on the live stream. Take a minute to sip the tea from Rose and Vine Gift Company. And then I guess I can also tell you some more upcoming topics that I have in my notebook to be discussing here on the channel. So aside from the running series Defense Against the Dark Narcs and the wokeism series within the LGBT community, not that I relish this topic at all, because I can't. It's terrible that I even have to address it. But the concept of MAPS, so minor attracted persons associating themselves with the LGBT community, this is not at all acceptable in any world whatsoever. So I will be coming out with a video that will go in line with the wokeism series talking about MAPS, but I will say at the very least here that is something that very quickly needs to be known that the LGBT community does not support, at least as it relates to people who share my opinion. I don't generally like to say that you can speak for any group of people. Really, all you can speak for is yourself. But that is one acronym that the LGBT community would do very well to distance themselves from, in my opinion. But it's something that is coming up in a big way and very seriously is being considered, seemingly, by mainstream media as a legitimate sexuality, and that, in my opinion, needs to be stomped out immediately. So I'm going to be doing a video about that here coming up, and addressing that, as well as another video that's going to be discussing what healthy and toxic versions of masculinity and femininity are. I don't feel like there is much discussion of those genders going on, because I do consider those genders. And everybody, whether you're male, female, doesn't matter, everybody has characteristics of both genders within them. Each individual has their own complex makeup of traits from both genders, and I think it's masculine and feminine are often conflated with male and female, and we tend to think a little bit too black and white in that area, and we get caught in the dangers of categorical thinking when it comes to that. We don't have a lot of nuanced discussion with it, and I can see why, because a lot of people in the radical transactivism are trying to shove these ideas down other people's throats as being one way or the other, when again the conversation is very nuanced. And again, I don't think we have very good definitions of those, and we don't see a lot of examples of healthy femininity and masculinity. We're seeing just lots and lots of toxic versions of both of those. So I'm going to be doing a discussion on that. Let me check the chat here. Oh, hey, Boldly Ambivalence here. Nice to see you, man. You're hitting the tail end of the discussion here, so I don't know if there's something that you wanted to have me talk about here briefly towards the end. So let's see, Sonia, and I hope that I'm pronouncing your name right, Sonia. If it's not too personal, can you say something about the role of your wife in achieving the level of peace, as you said, in taking personal responsibility? Yes, I can definitely talk about that. So, I believe that, alright, so this, well, maybe we'll have some funny anecdotes here in the very beginning. So when we first met, we hated each other. And I can very much see why from both sides of the fence, because, as I said before, I had a lot of behaviorally narcissistic tendencies within myself, because the environment in which I grew up in as a kid was not very emotionally accommodating, and I'm not saying that for pity points or anything like that. That's just the way that it is. My parents were very, very young when I was born. They were basically children. My mother was 17, still in high school when I was born, and my dad was 19. They did the best that they could in raising me and being responsible, but they both have a lot of baggage from childhood, coming from broken families, each themselves. And my father was a military individual, and so very, very emotionally unavailable there. And of course, people like that have to be, because of the absolutely horrific things that they see. He was deployed for war a couple of times. So I don't blame them at all for the way that things were. Yes, as adults, they had the choice and the ability to make things better, but like a lot of people, for one reason or another, they didn't take the personal responsibility, weren't made aware of it, XYZ, doesn't matter. The way that it was, they did the best that they could. So again, I don't blame them. I simply grew up with learning to navigate in that kind of environment. So when I met my wife, who was very empathetic, very curious, very understanding, and also somebody who was keenly interested in cooperation and learning how to take care of somebody, learning how to love somebody in the way that you might say true love actually goes. Love not in the sense of what do you give to me that makes me happy, but how can I make you happy? And not in a codependent kind of way, in a cooperative kind of way. That's really not something that I had ever learned or knew. And so I came at it from the usual narcissistic way, which was, what do you offer me that makes me happy, and then I will then, you give me, and then I will give you. Very transactional kind of thing, which is a lot of how, human interaction goes. And again, that's buried deeply in human behavioral biology. It's tit for tat. We have programming within our brains that is just that way. As long as you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you. But the second you're not nice to me, for whatever reason, doesn't matter, I'm going to give it right back to you. So, in any case, we came from two completely different, you can say, cultures, even though we both grew up in the same area. The culture and perhaps even the way that we think about things, the programming that we have, we saw things and behaved thusly very, very differently. So we hated each other. Of course, she hated me because I was a jerk, and I didn't like her because, well, I didn't understand how to behave with somebody like that. That my actions, instead of garnering anything positive, were actually just hurting. And that forced me to see that I was the problem there, which again is surmounting the ego in that way is difficult for a lot of people, sadly. But because I saw such value and respected her as a person, even though I didn't behave that way in the beginning at all, didn't even understand how to communicate that properly with my actions, not just my words, but my actions. It was incredibly painful and incredibly frustrating every step of the way, because everything that I had ever learned in dealing with somebody to create a positive outcome was all wrong when it came to dealing with her. So if you want to talk on more of a metaphysical or spiritual kind of level, some people talk about that, spark. There is perhaps some kind of soul recognition. You don't really have words for it, and somebody who comes from a biology background like me might just say, oh, you just were attracted to her on a pheromonal level, on a hormonal level. You're picking up on something that's just, as far as evolution goes, she's a match for you reproductively. If you were to be able to reproduce, this would be the person that you would want to do that with to maximize your genetic potential. Despite being homosexual, it's possible that those mechanisms are still within the brain. So you could say that spark that you experience with somebody is just that. It's just biology and nothing more. I personally choose to attribute it to something that's more, metaphysical and spiritual. And so I chose to continue to break down all of my unhealthy ways of thinking and being in order to realign myself with what I was seeing in her, which on a deeper level for me felt so much healthier. And I knew that on a deep level, but every day was just, constantly, fighting myself and fighting everything that I'd ever known. And it wasn't something that I could really share with anybody because they were like, dude, you're just not a good match for one another. I don't know why you're trying this. And I really couldn't give them a much better answer other than I just feel it deep down that this is something that I just need to do. And not in a toxically codependent kind of way, but I'm just going to be a million times better of a person if I go through this process. And this is very much so the case now. So yeah, now that level of peace that I have, which is having amazingly through this whole process of trying to align myself with the way that she thinks and sees the world, has also been a process of just gaining the value, or seeing the value in personal responsibility and gutting all of the childhood baggage, erasing is not a good word, healing all of the generational trauma, understanding things from a level of human psychology. And again, through all of this, I started teaching myself different disciplines: human behavioral biology, evolutionary biology, human psychology, learning about narcissism and personal responsibility and critical thinking and empathy emotional regulation, lots of stuff that you would learn if you got really good therapy. I, over the course of a good solid 2 years, spent just teaching myself this, all from professionals on YouTube, just listening to any video that had anything to do with those topics and everything surrounding it, and have kind of arrived at this point that I am now, 4 years after starting this process of coming out as a lesbian and then, going through the transitioning process to some degree in discovering myself. So, yeah, the entire impetus was meeting somebody who finally demonstrated to me that there was a different way of being. And like I said, that's how I know that there are going to be other people out there like me who started off with a bunch of garbage, terrible programming, social conditioning, that while they might have narcissistic tendencies that are underneath everything, they're more maybe type A personalities that are headstrong, perhaps a little less naturally empathetic, can learn to be a more balanced individual. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. And so, a little bit further to speak about my wife and her thought processes. So, there's a philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. Perhaps a little less known than some of the other, big name philosophers. I would recommend listening to some of the things that he has to say. A lot of people might dismiss him as kind of a, curmudgeonly, old man academic who just complains about nothing being right, and might have some stern viewpoints about the way that people conduct their lives, and a lot of people, you might call that a hashtag unpopular opinion. But the way that he goes about thinking of things demonstrates the difference between relative, what is it, honey? It's relative...
Relative objective versus relative subjective.
Right. Relative objective versus relative subjective thinking. That was a big one. I would recommend everybody learn the difference between those two, and even if you don't recognize the term specifically and can define them, just listening to a chunk of Arthur Schopenhauer's teachings and his philosophies will definitely get you a little ways into understanding what that is. And in fact, there is a channel on YouTube that has broken down a good chunk of Arthur Schopenhauer, and it's very, very digestible, that I would recommend. Let me see if I can find it here real quick for you guys, in case you're interested. Yeah, so the channel is Weltgeist, so WELTGEIST. Like I said, very digestible breakdown of Schopenhauer's teachings, everything that you can listen to on that channel that has to do with that. And then also there's another channel called Pursuit of Wonder. Also did some good stuff on the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer. So anyway, it's, as we've kind of discussed between my wife and I, and in a little bit here on this live stream that I've been doing with you guys, there seems to be a general majority way that human beings look at the world and think about the world. And it's less common for people to think the way that Arthur Schopenhauer thinks, which is relative objective, very objective thinking. And a lot of people will think about things and view things in relative subjective terms. And really, the biggest thing to note is that, and it's something that I really aim here on this channel to do with the civil discourse, is to remove as much subjective emotional influence from a discussion as you possibly can to arrive at something that's not an answer that's emotionally manipulated, which is one way that people will derail a conversation or direct it to some place that perhaps is not the most considerate as far as best possible outcome of something, because we're pulling heartstrings, we're emotionally manipulating with, well, what about the kids? That's a big one. That's a big one that government right now and trans radical activism is using is, well, what about the kids? What about the rate of kids that are ending their own lives? Trans kids. What about them? We need to do this for them, when really the statistics that they have on that are misinformed or missing certain parameters at best, and at worst they're just using this to they're again pulling at your heartstrings. Like you don't want kids to be harmed, so which is ironic. They don't want kids to be harmed, but they mean it in the sense that let us do what we want to do because that's really how we're going to keep kids from being harmed, when in reality what's happening is that a larger number of kids are being harmed by this medicalization push for allowing more kids to make these irreversible medical changes as it relates to them claiming that they're transgender, than the minority of kids who are perhaps not being allowed to medically transition when it would actually benefit them. So that's kind of the irony here, is that they're saying, ooh, no, look over here. These kids are the ones that were worried about being harmed, and they're ignoring a huge chunk of kids over here that are being harmed by this medicalization push. But anyway, so all that to say, going back to Arthur Schopenhauer, that my wife thinks more along the lines of the relative objective thinking versus relative subjective. And when I learned the difference between those two, you now all of a sudden have this angle on critical thinking that is unable to be swayed by those emotional manipulation tactics, which is, it's actually a very primitive way to railroad people, to control them with the illusion that they are making a decision with some kind of higher consciousness, when really what's happening is that emotional manipulation is just controlling that primitive part of the brain that just, it's fear, and they're using emotions on a level that makes it seem like it's higher-minded thinking, but it's not. It's a total illusion. But anyway, yes, okay, good. So good, Sonia, I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I thought that was it, and just wanted to make sure. So, you said, wow, the story of you two is beautiful, not in a fairy tale kind of way, but in a life kind of way, beauty with healed wounds and sparkles. Yes, yeah, not gonna lie, it was ugly at first, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody, especially someone who was really as well-meaning and innocent as she was. The brush with me and other people like me was kind of a rude awakening for her. She didn't really realize that there were people quite like that who existed, and it was very, very painful and very difficult for her. And of course, I would not have wanted to put her through any of that difficulty. That is the way that it went down. And finally now, it's in a place where there's an understanding and healing and peace, which is, priceless in my opinion. At the same time, again, it was ugly. So I'm very, very grateful that it has turned out to be a beautiful and positive thing in that way. It doesn't always turn out that way for people. Sometimes they brush up with something like this, and it's just a raw, seeping wound that doesn't seem to get much closure, and that's horrible. However, I would wish that if anybody were to entangle in this kind of situation, that they would come out the other side a better individual, productive and healed as best as possible. possible individual for a better society and a better, just a healthier self. Sonia, you majored in philosophy. I did not. So I hope that what I'm saying is not seemingly out of touch or completely inaccurate or garbage in that way. I try to educate myself as much as I can, just on a day-to-day basis listening to these things. And I know that getting perspective only from, YouTube videos and not always from professional lecturers might be a little bit of a biased perspective. I try. Boldly ambivalent, can you give a specific example of ugly behavior and how it's improved? Ooh, yes. Yes, I can. So, ugly behavior. Well, gosh, I suppose we might be best if we defined a context for ugly behavior. But I guess the first thing that's coming to mind, ugly behavior, would be if you, in a conflict situation. So supposedly, let's just say you're in a conflict situation with somebody who's a significant other, somebody that you claim to love. Ugly behavior would be when a conflict between the two of you erupts. Instead of being curious and concerned about rectifying the relationship, curious and concerned about caring for that other person's emotions, the ugly behavior would be sitting there considering only what you can get out of the situation and consistently interested in telling the other person what they're doing wrong. And that doesn't sound very ugly. I'm watering it down quite a bit. So in a fight, that would look like, let's just say your significant other comes to you and they say, I've been very stressed out about the fact that we are not spending enough time together. You're working a lot and we don't get to see one another, and there's not enough relationship going on. Instead of hearing that and saying, oh my gosh, you're right, I feel like I didn't want you to feel neglected in any way. What can I do to help that? The ugly would be, well, I'm not getting what I want out of the situation because I feel stifled. I feel controlled. Why are you coming at me with, that you want more, more, more? It's more of this, the dynamic that you're seeing is more of an adversarial one. Like when your significant other comes to you with something and they want more of a relationship and you thinking of it as an attack, that's the ugly part. That's one example, anyway. And of course, all of what the trans radical activists, as far as I can tell, is ugly behavior, trying to force their thoughts and their wants on other people and having precisely no empathy for that other person's position, like with pronoun usage. It's pretty deeply buried within us to see in a binary, male and female. And so you have people, the trans radical activists, who are saying, no, you will refer to me if you refer to me at all. And when you refer to me, it will be as X, Y, Z. And then getting very upset in an aggressive kind of way if that other person does not obey. So that is ugly, childlike, tyrannical, tantruming behavior. So how you would improve any of that is by, well, first of all, it's easy for me to say, have empathy for these people, and difficult to do that partially because people are used to being taken advantage of by other people. So I could say, have empathy for somebody else. And let's say you have empathy for that person, but they're just interested in taking advantage of you. Well, then that puts you in a position of being a doormat. So it's not quite so black and white where, the fix is, well, just have empathy for people, because it's not. The solution is kind of two-parted, where you have to understand where somebody is going to be equally respectful of you before you engage them with that kind of empathy. Otherwise, the best thing to do is to just leave that kind of situation. Like what happened with those SJW, Alphabet Soup Mafia people that were screaming at the professor who was screaming back at them. In that scenario, just leave. There's probably nothing that you can do to show empathy or reach those people because they are just interested in stomping all over you. In that frame of mind anyway. Not to say that those people always will be just interested in stomping on you, but in that frame of mind, probably not going to get anywhere. So, again, the solution would be to recognize when being empathetic with somebody would be useful and warranted in creating cooperation and civil discourse, and then employing that if said scenario occurs, or just walking away. Because the empathetic thing to do in a situation sometimes is to walk away, if only empathetic for yourself, but also not creating further stress and negative emotion by engaging in somebody who's in that frame of mind. So hopefully I answered your question there, at least in that context. If you can think of another context in which ugly behavior could happen, then certainly feel free to drop it down there. Okay, so let's see, Sonia. Oh, cool. All right, good. So I got it right. Yes, on philosophy. So, because I know that can be a deeply complicated topic. So I'm glad that I'm on the right track in some way with that. Okay, so anyway, so yeah, as far as long-term solutions to any of this, as far as I can tell, Aristotle, I follow Aristotle's line of philosophical thought when it comes to problem solving and civil discourse, which is that in any given scenario, there is no such thing as a perfect solution. There are always going to be factors that will seemingly defeat what it is that you are attempting to achieve. The best you can hope for is just a solution that helps the majority, and leave it at that. As opposed to, and this is not something I'm going to get too terribly deep into, but as opposed to the, oh goodness, there is a philosopher, George Wilhelm, look, I'm going to have to check my notes here. So as opposed to a philosophy, which is what we are seeing now with wokeism, which is critical theory. And critical theory, if I'm understanding this properly, and I've listened to a lot of James Lindsay's new discourses to kind of wrap my brain around this new way of philosophizing to arrive at a conclusion or a solution, critical theory is to distill a debate down to its most essential core. It's a form of alchemy, essentially, where you make a point and then its counterpoint, and you bring those two together to distill it even further and even further and even further until you come up with the ultimately singular solution, the only solution, the best solution. So, who is this philosopher? This is going to drive me crazy. Guess we're going to have to go to Google. Hegel, yes. Okay, so George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. So now that's where we get, as far as I can tell, a lot of what wokeism is about, which is why it seems to cannibalize itself so often, because that's the goal of it, is to make a point and then go, no, but here's, something else within it that negates it, and then consistently down, 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 down until you arrive at the pure solution, the absolute truth, I guess you could say, which don't believe that's a thing. Don't believe that there's such a thing as absolute truth, at least not in a world that we live in where there are so many complexities and moving parts that you can't. So simple as that. But that's why it just seems as though wokeism just descends into madness, because it's like a dog chasing its tail, just consistently circling the drain, down, 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 trying to find that absolute truth, and it never will. And if it does, it claims to find the absolute truth, it'll be something that's so socially taboo and appalling that I would hope that people would recognize it for what it is and, back off the cliff a little bit versus following the slippery slope down, which is actually what's happening with MAPS, minor attracted people. We've taken the logic of the LGBT community, one that they used to get things like gay marriage and rights in that way, which I support. They've followed the, well, but it's a sexuality that you can't help, all the way down the slippery slope to say that minor attracted persons have a sexuality that they cannot help and that it should be a recognized and accepted sexuality. No. Because that right there ignores the nuance and the context in which we're talking about, which is with children, who we already know are not developed mentally enough until at least the age of 25 to be able to make informed, mature decisions. And so, critical theory would have you continuously following this slippery slope until you get all the way down to where we are now, which is, minor attracted persons is a legitimate sexuality. No, it's not. Rather, it may be a sexuality that these individuals cannot help because they didn't choose it. That does not mean that we have to make space and accept it in society. Two totally different things. So, Sonia, considering what you've been through, one could say you have a richer insight, let's say, into the woke narrative, and therefore your criticism is deeper. Would you agree? Oh, let's see. I would say, perhaps I agree with you, that the mentality that seems to be the cornerstone of woke is privileges for the sake of each individual without consideration of the whole. And it's easier in a lot of the narcissistic tendencies that they have in that way to follow that lack of personal responsibility. And so when you adopt personal responsibility, I don't think you can ascribe, or I don't think that you can subscribe to woke ideology. I guess in a roundabout way. Having lived the experience, and I will say that there was a time that perhaps some of this woke ideology, I'm going to control you before you control me, and I'm, self-interested in that way, they're probably, and also, tolerance for the sake of tolerance in some ways, because that's loving and accepting. That would have been something that at some point, on a surface level, on an emotionally manipulative level, I probably would have agreed with, without the insights that I have, and the ability to critically think and take personal responsibility and see the problems that this toxic narrative has. That, yeah, because I've been on that side of the fence and now I'm on the other side of the fence, I would agree that I do have a richer understanding of why that ideology is a problem. Alright, so I think we've got a pretty good rounded conversation here, and we're running just about 2 hours, which is what I was aiming for, which is awesome. I have somebody, Islam Makashev. Are you a girl or a boy? You look like a boy wrestler. So I get these comments all the time. People asking me if I'm a boy or a girl, which I find kind of funny. I mean, right now with my live stream that I'm doing, people tuning in, they don't really know. But at the beginning of just about every video that I post on the channel, I start with the same intro, welcome to Tea Time, my friends, a place where I muse about my gender transition experience, and it kind of never ceases to amaze me that sometimes people, it's almost like they can't hear me. They're listening for something else, and they just gloss over that, and they're not actually hearing the words that I'm saying, which is another problem in general when it comes to communication that I talk about in my Defense Against the Dark Narcs series. Narcissism in general, their listening skills suck, and mine sucked in the very beginning. What's happening is that people are listening for what they want to hear, and they're listening and hearing words based on what they know those words to be. They're not actually hearing what you're saying, and neither are they thinking about all the words in the way that the words are actually defined. They're thinking about them from their own emotional bias, their own perspective on those words. So like when I say that I'm disordered, or that transgenderism is a mental disorder, people will get really, really fluffy about it because they don't want to be seen as disordered, or that that's somehow a negative label. They want to control other people's language in that way and say, well, it's not a disorder, even though that's precisely what it is. A disorder is something that is not in order, and in order would be somebody who, according to just straight binary biology, you have, you're a female, and you're okay with presenting, female. That is aligned and in order. I'm not saying that that is right or wrong. That's just objectively, relative objective thinking. That's just the way that it is. But again, narcissistic people will take words, and if they hear you, they will hear whatever words they want to hear. So again, I go in the beginning of every single video, and my transgender experience, not my experiences with other people that are transgender, my transgender experience, and people will still ask me, are you transgender? Are you really transgender? Which I got another video coming out about that too. The narcissistic side of gatekeeping. I addressed the what we can do for the community in gatekeeping in a positive way, for the image of the community. But I'll be talking about the narcissistic type of gatekeeping in an upcoming video. But anyway, so yeah, I get people all the time that still ask me if I'm a boy or a girl, and I don't take it personally.
So are you a girl or a boy?
So am I a girl or a boy? I am a biological female. Yes. So, so Islam was just joking. Yeah, he said, you got big hands, man. Are you a girl or a boy? Yes, I do have very big hands. You would not be the first person that has mentioned that. I had another, several people have commented on that they feel like I've got big hands, and I think I do. They are pretty masculinely large hands. And they always have been. Testosterone didn't change that at all. That's just the way it's always been. Anyway, yeah, there's a mention here about Russia and Ukraine. So, yeah, it's I try to stay out of global politics as much as I possibly can because I do not believe a lot of mainstream media in general reporting on things. All of that can be very easily propagandized, so I don't know exactly what's going on in the world with world events. All of that to say, at the very, very least, I think it's absolutely horrible that any innocent group of people would be suffering consequences simply because, again, these large government powers, being interested in only power, don't really give a darn about what's going on with the people on the ground. They're, collateral damage as far as they're concerned, and that's absolutely horrific, and my heart, my sympathies, my empathy to all those people who are suffering as a result of that. It's absolutely tragic. So my best hopes and wishes for everybody experiencing that on that side of the world, that you get through it as peaceably as you can, as horrible as that situation is and all the suffering that is coming from that. Alright, so back to some of the comments here. Alright, so I think we're all caught up on the chat, which is great. So I think, since Sonia, you were the original reason that this live stream was put on, and I greatly appreciate your very insightful thoughts and your questions, your comments, which allowed this live stream to happen. If there is anything in particular that you would like to end on, I will let you give you a few moments to write that in the chat. Otherwise, I am considering letting the live stream come to its natural conclusion here, because I think we covered everything very well. I'm very happy with it, and like I said, I'm very grateful for your input here. And to anybody else, of course, if you have commented on the channel before, I do try my very best to give the same quality and respect back to my commenters. I appreciate you all. The channel, always at the end of the day, the goal in mind is to myself become a better person, allow others to come on and have civil discourse discussions to improve all around in general, just improvement, cooperation, growth, personal growth. So I welcome anybody else's comments who, like Sonia, have insights that they would like to share, perhaps jumping points for which we can have a discussion on. And with all my projects that I have going on, that's always, at the end of the day, that's always the goal. What else? Oh, and for the last comment here from Islam, why are you speaking with such a serious face? So that's a whole other discussion I won't get too much into. I think, as far as all of my personal understandings, ruminations, discoveries, therapy goes, again, because I grew up in an environment that was pretty emotionally dysregulated as a kid, parents that were, my father, not at all good about expressing any kind of healthy range of emotions. It was, either serious or laughter or serious anger, and then a mother who also was pretty unpredictable with emotional regulation. My fix as a kid was just to remain what some people might call more still face, and it's a defense mechanism. It's something that's, as far as I'm concerned, deeply rooted in my childhood. Which, if I don't show much emotion, it's a lot safer that way. I can avoid potential negative consequence from the world around me, the adults around me. So I do struggle with showing more emotion, and especially when I'm just talking without anybody in front of me. You might find, if you see my interview videos with other people that I've done on the channel, especially Boldly Ambivalent, go check out his channel. He's got some fantastic interviewing skills and questions that really create for great conversation. The dynamic that I usually have with these people shows a lot more facial expression. So without the input of other people, especially, I tend to be much more still-faced. And like I said, that's probably a consequence of my childhood, but also in general, I'm a little bit more of a stoically contemplative person. My wife actually complains about this all the time, that she doesn't know what I'm thinking or feeling because it doesn't show on my face. And even when I'm saying that I'm feeling one way, the facial expressions don't really match up. So you might call that a little ways dysfunctional. I do my best to try to work with it. No, I have not been diagnosed with autism or anywhere on the spectrum. I don't fit really any of the symptoms. That's just perhaps one characteristic that I do share with that is just the lack of expression. So it can be off-putting to some people. I realize, and it sucks. All right, so Sonia, humbly honored. Oh, thank you. I'm really very pleased and grateful for your input today. Good live stream. Oh, great. So I'll be getting a lengthy comment back from you. Awesome. Great. And maybe that'll spur another live stream, another discussion that we can have, which I look forward to. So, oh yeah. Thank you, Boldly Ambivalent. So Boldly Ambivalent says that the lack of facial expression is calming. So what's so fascinating to me is that two people can look at the same thing and see something completely different. It's kind of a cliche saying. However, I have really learned to take that to heart, especially when it comes to the transition and being gendered. In a lot of the earlier transition, when I was sitting on the fence of androgynous, people would have to pick, whether to call me he or she, and I always felt so terrible for people trying to figure out what to call me. You could see it, you could hear it, the indecision and the anxiety, and I think that was the worst part of it for me. Not that I was being misgendered, was just seeing that painful indecision with other people that I did not wish that on them. But the fact that it's really the way that somebody responds to you or thinks about you can have just as much to do with their own personal experiences and biases as what you may actually be presenting or projecting objectively. So, for example, once in a great while, I'll still, maybe a few months ago, I would get ma'amed. I would be called, she or ma'am, mostly from behind, not anymore, face to face. But that was just an indicator of the way that people were seeing me based on their experiences, and perhaps not exactly objectively how I was presenting. So anytime somebody gives me that input, to some degree, it's just coming from their own perspective and their own experience. So some people find my countenance to be very calming, and I have heard that actually many times before. In having conversations with people, they do find me to be very emotionally regulating in that way, because I don't, when somebody is emoting some very strong emotion to me, typically I even further, become more the opposite. Less alarming facial expressions. My tone of voice tends to be even more level, neutral, and so perhaps from that perspective, then people find that grounding, that they then are not having their emotions reflected back to them. And I know in therapy sometimes therapists have been taught, you want to mirror to some degree people's emotions so that they feel they are being seen and heard. And to some degree, that's definitely a practice that I think worth noting. And other people will see my stoicism as lack of interest. They'll start to get nervous because I'm not showing maybe more engagement, and they'll get a little anxious that perhaps I'm not very interested in it in that way. So yeah, it's interesting to see how different people respond to me behaving a certain way. My behavior doesn't change, but the way people respond to me or think about me might change based on their perspective or even their mood for the day. It's really it's a very interesting exercise in not taking things personally. Oh, Zorak, hey, good to see you too. Awesome. Yeah, so we let's see. I wish sometimes when I do these live streams, I need to really start maybe letting you guys know a little bit more ahead of time so that you can see that I'm getting ready to pop on. I know that I try to do them like on Sunday afternoons when I think maybe a chunk of people will be available, but I obviously have viewers from all over the world, so picking a time that works for that. And also, not everybody is as fortunate to have weekends off, but I can and will do a little bit better here to announce ahead of time if I'm planning on doing a live stream, maybe make a community post or something like that so that I can get more of you guys on, because it's I think that would be awesome to have more of a discourse and a discussion with lots of you regular viewers. So yeah, so Zorak, it's great to see you. Okay, and yeah, as you said, Zorak, perhaps the stability of stoicism is nice for some. Yeah, and it's really interesting. I have found, and I did not expect this at all. This has been a surprise to me and fascinating, is that there are a lot of my viewers who come on the channel and comment that they are somewhere on the spectrum, the autism spectrum. And they very much appreciate the way that I present the material because it is not dramatic. It lacks that huge fluctuation in emotion and tone, and that they appreciate that. And I have a following of people on the autistic spectrum, which I never, because I'm not autistic myself, at least not officially diagnosed in any way, and I've taken lots of online tests and watched videos of people who have been diagnosed with autism. Most of the characteristics I do not embody, so that's really interesting to me, and cool, really, just in general. So that was a surprise when I started the channel to start seeing more of that. Sonia says another factor is that I suspect you are an introvert. You strike me. Yes, I am an introvert. What's interesting is that so the Briggs-Myers personality scale, I have scored INTJ, introvert, intuitive, thinking, and judgmental, which apparently is less than 2% of the population. Also very uncommon for it to present in biological females, which for me, I have to laugh because so many things that I have manifested within my life are all very, very atypical for biological females. So the congenital condition that I have with my chest, pectus excavatum, is apparently, it happens to less than 1% of the female population and presents 3 times as much within the male population, biological male population. And again, with the INTJ, very uncommon for biological females, but just in general, not a very common personality score of INTJ for people in general, less than 3% of the population that way. But yes, introverted, certainly. I, at the very least, possess the ability most of the time to talk about anything with anyone. at least for a short period of time, so I can, what you might call chameleon in that way. It's a great skill to have. But yes, in general, introvert. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. And Bully Ambivalent says, you're making me wonder about myself. I feel like that's why you have that channel. Your channel is all about making those uncomfortable confrontations within yourself, which is why I love what you do on the channel. That is such an admirable quality in people that I don't feel a lot of people possess. And that goes back to what we were talking about towards the beginning of the stream. In fixing narcissism within society in general requires that somebody be brave enough to want to confront the things that are not healthy or perhaps need a little bit of work within oneself. That's a very difficult path to choice to make. It means that everything that you do has meaning, and there's personal responsibility there. So that's one thing that I, again, greatly appreciate about you. I feel like it's an increasingly rare quality in people that when I see it, I praise it as much as I possibly can, because it's, as far as I can tell, pretty priceless quality. So, all right, so cool. I think we have finally covered everything that I want to cover. So, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. So, even though I'm just now starting to see some more people pop on, that tends to be the case, promise you guys, I will make it a point to actually announce what I'm going to be doing live stream, and not just have it be kind of a somewhat impromptu and quiet thing that happens between me and another commenter. I think that YouTube prioritizes streams, and so perhaps if you have the bell clicked for notifications on the channel, that at least I know when I'm subscribed and click notifications for other channels, when they go live, I do get a notification that pops up on my smartphone. So I guess I perhaps rely a little bit too much on the fact that people have those enabled, or that they have access to that in that way, and that they'll pop on based on the time that I've chosen, having the highest likelihood that people will actually be available at that time. So anyway, I'll do better about announcing that. And yeah, Sonia says I'm the rarest type. I think okay. So Sonia, you're an INFP. I think another rare type is INFJ, which consequently is what my wife is an INFJ. So we're INFJ and INTJ, which is, at least according to the personality profiles, two profiles that are very, very strong-minded individuals that would have a hell of a time coming together. And boy, has that been true. Generally not liking one another at first, but again, I see so much value in making something like that work, because for me, life is not necessarily about taking the easiest route, the hedonistic route, which is just about mindless self-indulgence and chasing happiness. I think that's a pretty fruitless pursuit here, personally. And so choosing something that is a pursuit that consistently challenges you to be a better person, I should say a healthier person, well-rounded, more peaceful, less constantly in pursuit of the highs, and then always being subjected to the lows then when you're not achieving that, finding that stasis where it's just a stasis that's kind of a trajectory, always learning and growing and bettering yourself. To me, that is where the most fruitful value is. Obviously, not everybody thinks that way. That's just my own personal philosophy, my own goals for life. So, INTJ, like myself, trying to work with INFJ, and not just for the work aspect, but because on that deeper level, I feel that connection, that what I am now coming to see true love actually is I could not do it any other way now that I know what that is. So, oh yeah, Zora, thank you. You have an awesome weekend. I don't even know what today is. Yes, today's Sunday, so I don't even know what day it is. But yes, you have a wonderful week as well. I will. I would be actually, Zorak, if you're still listening, would love to hear any of your thoughts as well on anything that you would like to see covered. And Boldly Ambivalent says, did we ever talk about the Enneagram? No, I don't think that we did. Looks like I got ENTP once, but I don't remember what that means. Okay, so yeah, ENTP, Boldly Ambivalent, is extroversion, intuition, thinking, and perceiving. So I don't know too much about any of the other personality types, other than to just know what those 4 categories mean roughly. So yeah, it's when I started to kind of discover who I was. Even just taking that basic personality test allowed me to understand more about myself, where my strengths and weaknesses are, why I did what I did, and what I could do to kind of improve. So that was all part of my my 2 years of self-education to reorient my life and my thoughts in general. So anyway, okay. So before I keep going on, we will cut it here. So thank you guys very, very much for participating and listening, and I look forward to all of your thoughts with my projects coming up, and also with thoughts of your own, anything that you would like to have me covered. Any and all of that is incredibly welcome, and can't wait to address it. So you guys have a fantastic week ahead, and hopefully we'll see you soon.